Fans of David Bowie around the world have paid tribute to the rock star, who has died at the age of 69. A remarkable array of musicians, artists and leaders have spoken of their admiration for a musician whose career spanned half a century. Tonight we'll assess the influence and legacy of a performer who helped to define pop music. Musicians and countless fans around the world have been paying tribute to the life and music of David Bowie, who died this morning. He was 69 and had been suffering from cancer. His career, which also encompassed acting, record producing, art and fashion, has left an indelible mark on popular culture. The Rolling Stones described him as a true original, while others expressed their admiration for a restless artist who consistently challenged convention. Iggy Pop said simply, "He was the best there is." Bowie's final album was released on Friday, on his birthday, and appears to presage his own death. Our entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson reflects on an extraordinary life.
David Bowie started out in the 1960s as a folk artist, but never stayed still for long. He was there at the advent of glam rock, experimenting with his own sexuality by wearing a dress on the album cover of The Man Who Sold the World, and famously draping an arm around his guitarist Mick Ronson on Top of the Pops.
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our mind.
He killed off Ziggy Stardust live on stage in 1973 at the Hammersmith Apollo, replacing him with Aladdin Sane. In 1999, he told the BBC why he felt a constant need to change.
I felt really comfortable going on stage as somebody else, and it seemed a rational decision to keep on doing that. And so I got quite besotted with the idea of just creating character after character.
And change he did. Incorporating the Philly soul sound into his music gave him his first US #1. Before heading to Berlin to make 3 of the most sonically groundbreaking albums of the 1970s with Brian Eno. He also found time to revitalise the careers of both Lou Reed, producing his album Transformer, and Iggy Pop, who paid tribute today, saying their friendship was the light of his life. Then, at the start of the 80s, Bowie became one of the biggest pop stars on the planet after teaming up with Nile Rodgers from Chic. There was also his side career as an actor, including Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth and the children's fantasy Labyrinth. Not all his musical experiments found critical or commercial success. Tin Machine was his unloved attempt to form a band, and there were forays into drum and bass. He stopped touring in 2004 after an on-stage heart attack in Germany. But in 2013, he surprised the music world by returning with The Next Day, an album which would win him Best Male at the Brit Awards. His long-term collaborator, Tony Visconti, who worked with him from the 1960s right up until the end, has described Bowie's death as a work of art, and his album Black Star, which came out on Friday, as his parting gift. The first line of David Bowie's final single, Lazarus, suggests that even in the last act of his life, there was an element of performance.
Look up here, I'm in heaven.
People across the globe have been reflecting on what David Bowie and his work meant to them. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, described him as an extraordinary person whose music he listened to endlessly in the 70s. Paul McCartney said Bowie's music played a very strong part in British musical history, while Madonna described him as a unique and great artist who had changed her life forever. The German Foreign Office even credited him with helping to bring down the Berlin Wall. Ordinary fans have also been paying tribute, including these people in Beckenham in South London, where the singer grew up.
Great fan, he's inspirational. I only heard him on the radio yesterday.
Absolutely devastating. The guy was a legend. Only lived down the road here. He used to do his gigs in, used to be called the Rat and Parrot. Fantastic music, fantastic guy.
Fans also gathered in Heddon Street in central London, where the cover of the famous Ziggy Stardust album was photographed. One of them, Dimitri, described why Bowie's work was important to him.
Through such amazing music, it was a launch pad for all kinds of ideas in fashion, culture, the influence he had on people to be themselves. You don't often actually get an artist that really engenders that with so many people across so many generations.
Not only is David Bowie considered one of pop music's key innovators, he also helped to transform the business itself. He was the first musician to float himself on the stock exchange and broke new ground in making an album available for download. Our correspondent Nick Hyam reflects on Bowie's influence on the wider music industry.
David Bowie's Telling Lies, released in 1996 as a digital download, perhaps the first time a major recording artist had chosen to release a song online only.
Telling lies.
David Bowie was a visionary. He'd foreseen the devastation the internet and free music downloads would wreak in the music business, and determined, if at all possible, to make it work to his advantage. In 1998, he launched his own internet service provider, BowieNet, offering subscribers music, clips, live concerts, and access to a huge archive of his own material. Around the same time, he floated $55 million worth of Bowie bonds. He handed over the royalties on his next 10 years' record sales in exchange for upfront cash. It was called securitization, a similar technique to the one the banks later used so disastrously to make money on their mortgage debts. Since music copyrights would soon be worthless, and music itself would become like running water or electricity, Bowie later explained, he was just taking advantage of the last few years of the old dispensation. And he kept his ability to surprise.
Where are we now? Where are we now?
The single Where Are We Now was released out of the blue online on his birthday in 2013. People thought he'd retired a decade earlier. In fact, Where Are We Now heralded an unsuspected new album the next day. News of this surprising coup quickly went viral, to use the language of the digital world, which Bowie proved so adept at manipulating. Other artists since have tried a similar trick, but as in so many things, it was Bowie who got there first.
One of David Bowie's closest musical collaborators, Brian Eno, said his friend's death had come as a complete surprise, as did nearly everything about him. And it's this relentless innovation, experimentation and reinvention that critics say helped set Bowie apart from his contemporaries and ensure his influence spread beyond music alone. Our arts editor Will Gompertz has this assessment of Bowie's wider cultural significance.
If David Bowie could be summed up in one word, it would be curious. He was not an academic, but he had the inquisitive mind of an intellectual. The world to him was a mutable place full of exciting new ideas, begging to be explored. He was, in that regard at least, the Picasso of pop, an innovative, visionary, restless artist who synthesized complex avant-garde concepts into beautifully coherent works that touched the hearts and minds of millions. He arrived on the scene in a blaze of orange hair and pastel makeup and transformed early 70s rock and roll from being a macho fest into something far, far more nuanced and strange. His world was one of alienation and ambiguity, misfits and space oddities. The older generation were bemused, the rockers dismissive, but teenagers in bedrooms from Cornwall to Kilmarnock were transfixed. At last, here was somebody who understood them. He made plain his artistic modus operandi in 1971 in the song Changes. Turn and face the strange, he sang, just gonna have to be a different man. And so he was. From Ziggy Stardust to the Thin White Duke, David Bowie became transfixed by the idea of creating character after character in an act of arch pop postmodernism. He was not motivated by fame, fortune or approval, but by a compulsion to share his perspective on a changing world. And the world listened. The rebellious teenagers that first fell for him grew up, became part of the establishment, and had their own children to whom they passed down the singer-songwriter's legacy. And so David Bowie became a pop icon, a legend. But underneath all the mascara and make-believe was still a man called David Jones from South London, an ordinary chap with a down-to-earth sense of humour, who just happened to be an extraordinarily gifted artist.
An international aid convoy carrying food, medicine and blankets has arrived